The water was cold enough to make Elara's fingers ache as she scrubbed the stone floor of the kitchen, but she had learned long ago not to complain. Complaining only made things worse. The rough brush bit into her palms as she worked her way across the tiles, removing the mud her younger brother had tracked in after his riding lesson. Behind her, she could hear her mother's voice drifting from the dining room where the family was finishing breakfast. "Honestly, Lord Thorne, the girl is useless. She can't even manage to keep the floors clean." Her father's response was muffled, but Elara didn't need to hear the words to know he agreed. He always agreed with her mother. Elara sat back on her heels and wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. She was 22 years old, and she had spent the last 15 years of her life as little more than a servant in her own home. It hadn't always been this way. When she was small, before her mother, Lady Vane, gave birth to twin boys, Elara had been loved. She remembered her father lifting her onto his shoulders, her mother braiding flowers into her hair. But everything changed when the twins arrived. Suddenly, she was the eldest daughter, the one who could be useful, the one who could help with the housework while Lady Vane recovered. Except Lady Vane never stopped needing help, and the temporary arrangement became permanent. By the time Elara was 10, she was doing all the cooking and cleaning. By 12, she was washing her brother's clothes and making their beds. By 15, her parents had dismissed all their servants, and Elara had taken over their duties entirely. Her brothers grew up treated like princes, while Elara scrubbed floors and hauled water and spent her days in the kitchen preparing meals she barely had time to eat. "Elara," her mother's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "The morning room needs dusting, and your father's study is a disgrace. I want both done before lunch." Elara pushed herself to her feet, her knees protesting from hours spent kneeling on the hard floor. "Yes, Mother." She gathered her cleaning supplies and made her way to the morning room, a bright space at the front of the house that her mother used for entertaining guests. As she worked, dust motes dancing in the sunlight that streamed through the tall windows, Elara let her mind wander. She thought about the village beyond their estate, about the lives other young women her age were living. Some were married with children of their own. Others worked in shops or taverns, earning wages they could spend as they pleased. A few had even left Millbrook entirely, seeking their fortunes in the larger towns to the south. But Elara had no wages, no freedom, and no prospects. Her parents had made it clear she was too valuable as unpaid labor to be allowed to leave. When suitors had occasionally come calling in her younger years, Lady Vane had turned them away with excuses: too young, too busy, not suitable. Now at 22, with work-worn hands and exhaustion permanently etched beneath her eyes, the suitors had stopped coming altogether. "There you are." Elara turned to find her brother Cedric lounging in the doorway. At 16, he was tall and handsome with their father's dark hair and their mother's blue eyes. He had the easy confidence of someone who had never been denied anything. "Mother wants tea in the garden, with those little cakes she likes." Elara set down her dusting cloth. "I'll prepare it now." "And Elara." Cedric's voice stopped her at the door. "Try not to burn them this time. Mother was embarrassed when the Ashfords visited last week. The cakes hadn't been burned. They had been perfectly golden. But Lady Vane had needed something to criticize. And Elara had learned it was easier to accept blame than to argue. She made her way to the kitchen and set about preparing the tea service, her movements automatic after years of practice. As she arranged the delicate cakes on Lady Vane's best china, she caught sight of her reflection in the polished silver teapot. Her face was thinner than she remembered, her cheekbones sharp beneath skin that rarely saw sunlight. Her hair, once a rich chestnut, hung in a simple braid down her back, dull from lack of care. Her dress was one she had sewn herself from leftover fabric, plain and practical, nothing like the fine gowns her mother and brothers wore. She looked exactly like what she was. A servant. Elara carried the tea service to the garden where her mother sat beneath the shade of an old oak tree, her embroidery spread across her lap. Lady Vane barely glanced up as Elara set the tray on the table beside her. "You took long enough." The tea will be cold. I prepared it fresh, Mother. It should still be warm. Don't argue with me, girl. Lady Vane's voice was sharp. Pour it, and then return to your duties. The upstairs hallway needs sweeping. Elara poured the tea with steady hands, years of practice keeping the liquid from spilling despite the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. She had just turned to leave when her mother spoke again. Oh, and Elara? Your father and I have been discussing your future. Something in Lady Vane's tone made Elara pause. My future? You're not getting any younger, and you've proven quite hopeless at attracting a suitable husband. Lady Vane took a delicate sip of tea. We've decided to arrange a position for you with Lord Ashford. He's looking for a housekeeper, and we've recommended you highly. The words hit Elara like a physical blow. Lord Ashford was a widower in his 60s, known for working his servants to exhaustion and paying them next to nothing. You're sending me away? Don't be dramatic. You should be grateful. It's more than you deserve given your complete lack of accomplishments or charm. Lady Vane waved a dismissive hand. You'll leave at the end of the month. That gives you 3 weeks to ensure everything here is in order before you go. Elara stood frozen, her mind reeling. 3 weeks. They were giving her 3 weeks to prepare to leave the only home she had ever known. Not for freedom or opportunity, but for another position of servitude. And they expected her to be grateful. I won't go. The words escaped before Elara could stop them. Lady Vane's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. What did you say? I said, I won't go. Elara's voice was stronger now. Years of suppressed anger finally finding release. I've spent 15 years working for this family without pay, without thanks, without even basic kindness. If I'm going to be a servant, I'll do it somewhere of my own choosing. Not somewhere you've sold me to like cattle. The slap came so fast Elara barely saw it coming. Her mother's palm connected with her cheek with enough force to snap her head to the side. How dare you speak to me that way? Lady Vane was on her feet now, her face flushed with rage. After everything we've done for you. Fed you, clothed you, given you a roof over your head. I've earned all of that and more. Elara's cheek burned, but she held her ground. I've worked myself to exhaustion for this family. I've given up everything. You've given up nothing because you had nothing to give. Lady Vane's voice was shrill now. You were a burden from the moment you were born. A useless girl when we needed a son. The twins are worth 10 of you. And still you dare to show ingratitude? Elara felt something break inside her. Not her spirit. That had been cracking for years. This was different. This was the final severing of whatever threads of obligation or family feeling had kept her tethered to this place. Then you won't miss me when I leave. She untied her apron with shaking hands and let it fall to the ground. I'm going. Not to Lord Ashford's. But away from here. Away from you. You'll do no such thing. Lady Vane grabbed for her arm, but Elara stepped back. If you walk out that door, you are no daughter of mine. You'll have nothing. No references, no money, nowhere to go. I already have nothing. Elara's voice was calm now. The decision made. The difference is that now I'm choosing it. She turned and walked toward the house, her mother's shouts following her. Elara didn't stop. She went to the tiny room she had been given years ago when her brothers needed more space. Little more than a storage closet with a narrow bed. She owned almost nothing. A spare dress, a few personal items, a book her grandmother had given her before she died. She gathered them quickly, her hands surprisingly steady, and wrapped them in a shawl. By the time she descended the main staircase, her father had emerged from his study. Elara, your mother says you're being hysterical. This is unacceptable behavior. Lord Thorne stood with his arms crossed, his expression stern. You will apologize and return to your duties. No. Elara walked past him toward the front door. Elara. Her father's voice rose. I am still your father, and you will obey me. You stopped being my father the day you decided I was more valuable as a servant than as a daughter. Elara pulled open the heavy oak door. Goodbye, Thomas. She stepped out into the afternoon sunlight and didn't look back. Behind her, she could hear her parents shouting, her mother's voice reaching a pitch that might have been satisfying under other circumstances. But Elara felt nothing but a strange, hollow calm as she walked down the long drive that led away from the estate. She had no plan, no destination, no idea what she would do when night fell. All she knew was that she was done. Done being invisible. Done being convenient. Done accepting cruelty as though it were love. The spring air was warm on her face as Elara reached the main road. To the left lay Millbrook Village, where everyone knew her family and would surely send her back. To the right, the road led into the forest that bordered the northern edge of her father's land. She had never been that way before. Servants didn't have time for exploring. Elara turned right. The forest was dense with old-growth trees, oak and ash and pine that had stood for centuries. The road narrowed to a path, then to little more than a deer track. Elara followed it anyway, putting distance between herself and the life she had finally escaped. She walked until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Her feet ached in her worn shoes, and she had no food or water. But she felt something she hadn't experienced in 15 years. She felt free. The path led her deeper into the woods where the trees grew so thick that only scattered beams of fading sunlight penetrated the canopy. Elara was beginning to consider finding a place to rest for the night when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the forest. The clash of metal on metal, followed by a roar that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She should have run. Should have turned and fled back the way she had come. Instead, Elara found herself moving toward the sound, drawn by curiosity and something deeper, a feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. She emerged into a clearing just as the sun dipped below the horizon. In the fading light, Elara saw 3 men with drawn swords surrounding something massive. No, not something. Someone. The figure in the center of the clearing stood at least 7 feet tall, his shoulders impossibly broad, his presence radiating a power that made Elara's breath catch. He wore no shirt despite the evening chill, and she could see the play of muscle beneath his skin as he moved. But it was his eyes that held her frozen. They caught the last rays of sunlight and reflected it back like an animal's, burning with an inner fire. Last chance, the giant said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground. Leave now, and I'll let you live. One of the men laughed, though it sounded nervous. We've got you outnumbered, beast. The bounty on a live Lycan will set us up for life. Lycan? The word sent a chill through Elara. She had heard stories, of course. Everyone had. Shapeshifters who lived in the wild places, powerful and dangerous and nothing like humans despite their appearance. But she had always assumed the stories were just that, stories. The giant's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. A live Lycan, he repeated. Did it occur to you to wonder why the bounty specifies alive? He moved before the hunters could react. One moment he was standing still, the next he was a blur of motion. The first hunter went down with a cry, his sword flying from his hand. The second lunged forward, but the giant caught his blade with his bare hand, yanked it away, and tossed it into the trees as though it weighed nothing. The third hunter, smarter than his companions, was already running. The giant let him go. His attention focused on the 2 men on the ground. I told you to leave. His voice was deadly quiet now. Next time you decide to hunt something, make sure you're not the prey. He turned and walked toward the far side of the clearing, dismissing the hunters as if they were nothing more than a minor annoyance. That was when his eyes found Elara. She stood frozen at the edge of the trees, her small bundle still clutched in her hands, too shocked to move. The giant stopped, his body going very still. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the darkening clearing. Then he spoke, and his voice was completely different than it had been with the hunters. Soft. Careful. You're not one of them. It wasn't a question. Elara found her voice. No. I heard the fighting. You should run. But even as he said it, the giant took a step toward her. I'm dangerous. So I've noticed. Elara surprised herself by not running. Something about him called to her in a way she didn't understand. Are you going to hurt me? The giant's expression shifted. Something like pain crossed his features. No. The word was absolute. I would never hurt you. Another step closer. What's your name? Elara. Elara. The way he said it made her name sound like something precious. I'm Kaelen. The name suited him. Dark and powerful and just a little bit dangerous. You're a Lycan. Yes. He stopped a few feet away, as if worried about coming too close. Does that frighten you? Elara considered the question. She should be terrified. She was alone in the forest with a creature from stories. Something that could probably kill her without effort. But when she looked at him, really looked at him, all she saw was the carefulness in his movements, the way he kept his distance, the concern in those burning eyes. No, she said finally. You don't frighten me. Something shifted in Kaelen's expression. Relief, maybe, or wonder. Then you're either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both. Elara felt a smile tug at her lips. The first genuine smile and longer than she could remember. I left my home today with nothing but what I could carry and nowhere to go. That seems fairly foolish. Or brave. Kaelen moved a little closer. Why did you leave? The question opened something inside Elara, and the words came pouring out. About her parents, about years of servitude, about the final confrontation that had set her free. Kaelen listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each revelation. When she finally fell silent, he was quiet for a long moment. Your parents treated you as a servant. His voice was tight with carefully controlled anger. Their own daughter. Yes. And now you have nowhere to go. No. Elara lifted her chin. But I'd rather have nowhere than go back there. Kaelen studied her face, and Elara had the strange sensation that he could see straight through to her soul. Come with me. The words were simple, but they hung in the air between them like a promise. Come with me, Elara. I can offer you safety, a home. A place where you'll never be treated as anything less than you deserve. You don't know me. No. Kaelen took another step, close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. But I know what I see. Strength. Courage. Someone who chose freedom over comfort. That tells me everything I need to know. Elara looked up at him. This giant stranger who had appeared in her life at the exact moment she needed him. Logic said she should be cautious, should ask questions, should demand proof that his intentions were honorable. But something deeper than logic was speaking, a certainty that thrummed in her bones. This man, this Lycan, would never hurt her. Would, in fact, protect her with a fierceness that took her breath away. Where would we go? She asked. My territory is half a day's journey north. Kaelen's voice was rough with an emotion Elara couldn't name. I rule over a pack of Lycans. We have a settlement. A community. You would be safe there. You would be. He paused, as if searching for the right words. You would be honored. The word struck Elara as strange, but before she could ask what he meant, a sound from the trees made them both turn. The hunters who had fled were returning. And they had brought reinforcements. Run, Kaelen said. His body already shifting, changing. Elara, run now. But Elara didn't run. She couldn't. Not when Kaelen was about to face a dozen armed men alone. Not when something inside her screamed that leaving him was impossible. She stood her ground as Kaelen's form rippled and changed, bones reshaping, muscles expanding. Where the man had stood, a massive wolf now crouched, its fur the color of midnight, its eyes still burning with that same fierce intelligence. And Elara, who should have been terrified, who should have fled screaming into the night, felt only one thing: recognition. This was where she was meant to be. Beside this powerful creature who had offered her safety and honor when her own family had given her nothing but contempt. The hunters charged forward, their weapons raised, and Elara made her choice. She picked up one of the discarded swords and stepped forward to stand beside the wolf. Whatever came next, she would face it. She had already lost everything. She had nothing left to fear. The sword was heavier than Elara expected, her arms already trembling with the weight of it. She had no training, no experience with weapons, but she planted her feet and raised the blade anyway. Beside her, Kaelen in his wolf form released a growl that vibrated through her chest. A sound of warning and fury directed at the approaching hunters. "Get away from the beast, girl," one of the men shouted. "We don't want to hurt you." Elara's laugh was sharp and bitter. "That's more consideration than my own family showed me." She adjusted her grip on the sword, her knuckles white. "Leave now, or you'll have to go through both of us." The hunters hesitated. They had come prepared to capture a Lycan, not to fight a woman who looked half wild and desperate enough to actually use that sword. Their leader, a grizzled man with scars crossing his face, raised his hand. "The bounty's not worth dying for. Fall back." But before the hunters could retreat, one of the younger ones, too eager or too stupid to recognize danger, lunged forward with his sword raised high. Kaelen moved with supernatural speed, but the angle was wrong, and the blade was already descending toward Elara. She tried to dodge, tried to bring her own sword up to block, but she was too slow, too inexperienced. The blade never reached her. Kaelen's massive form crashed into her, knocking her safely aside, even as the hunter's sword bit into his shoulder. The wolf's yelp of pain cut through Elara like a knife. She scrambled to her feet, fury blazing through her veins. The young hunter was stumbling back, shocked that he had actually landed a blow. Elara didn't think. She swung her sword with all the strength she possessed. The flat of the blade connected with the side of the hunter's head, and he went down hard. The other hunters stared in shock. The grizzled leader swore under his breath. "Retreat. Now." This time, they listened, melting back into the darkening forest and leaving their unconscious companion behind. Elara dropped the sword and ran to Kaelen, her hands hovering over the wound on his shoulder. Already, the wolf's form was shimmering, shifting back to human. "You're hurt." Her voice shook. "You're bleeding because of me." "I'm fine." Kaelen's human form solidified, and Elara tried very hard not to notice that the transformation had left him completely naked. He seemed unconcerned by this, his attention focused entirely on her. "Are you injured?" "No. You pushed me out of the way." Elara forced herself to meet his eyes instead of staring at his very impressive bare chest. "You saved me. Always." The word came out fierce and certain. "I will always protect you, Elara." Something in his tone made her breath catch. But before she could examine the feeling, Kaelen was standing and moving to where he had left his clothing before the first fight. He dressed quickly, though Elara noticed he favored his injured shoulder. "We need to leave," he said, scanning the darkening forest. "They'll be back with more men, and I'd rather not fight them near you." "Your shoulder, it will heal." Kaelen cut her off gently. "Lycans heal quickly. By morning, it will be nothing but a scar, and I have plenty of those already." He held out his hand to her. "Can you walk?" "It's several hours to the border of my territory, and we should cover as much ground as possible before we rest." Elara looked at his outstretched hand. This offering of protection and partnership from a stranger who had already bled for her. She placed her palm against his, and the contact sent warmth racing up her arm. "I can walk." They moved through the forest as night fell completely, Kaelen somehow able to navigate the darkness as if it were day. He kept hold of her hand, steadying her when she stumbled over roots and guiding her around obstacles she couldn't see. His palm was warm and rough against hers, his grip gentle despite the obvious strength in his fingers. "Tell me about your territory," Elara said after they had been walking for over an hour. "What should I expect?" Kaelen was quiet for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "We call it Wolf Haven. It's a settlement of about 200 Lycans built in a valley between two mountains. The land is wild and beautiful. Forests, rivers, meadows that bloom with wildflowers in spring. 200, Elara tried to imagine it. That's larger than Millbrook. And better governed, I hope." There was dry humor in his voice. "We have no lords or ladies who treat their own blood as servants." "You said you rule them. That makes you a lord, doesn't it?" "I'm an alpha. It's different." Kaelen helped her over a fallen log. "Leadership among Lycans is earned through strength and maintained through service. An alpha who fails his pack can be challenged and replaced. Power is not a birthright, but a responsibility." "That sounds better than the human system." "It has its own complications." Kaelen's hand tightened slightly on hers. "But yes, I prefer it." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and Elara found herself studying what she could see of Kaelen in the moonlight that filtered through the trees. He moved with a predator's grace. His body relaxed despite their circumstances. He was aware of everything around them. She could tell by the way his head turned at distant sounds, the way his body shifted to keep himself between her and any potential threat. "You called me honored," Elara said suddenly. "Earlier. You said I would be honored in your territory." "What did you mean?" Kaelen stopped walking. They had reached a small clearing where moonlight pooled like silver water. He turned to face her, and the expression in his eyes made Elara's heart race. "I meant what I said. You will be honored because you deserve it. Because you're brave and strong, and you chose freedom even when it cost you everything." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "And because you're mine." The possessive word should have alarmed her. Should have sent her running back into the forest. Instead, it settled into Elara's chest like something that had always belonged there. "Yours." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Forgive me." Kaelen dropped his hand, though he didn't step back. "I'm being too forward. You barely know me, and I'm speaking as if." He cut himself off, jaw tightening. "We should keep moving." But Elara caught his hand before he could turn away. "Speaking as if what?" Kaelen looked down at their joined hands, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Among Lycans, we have something called a mate bond. A connection between two souls chosen by fate, or the moon, or whatever force governs such things. It's rare. Some Lycans never find their mate. I've lived for nearly 100 years without finding mine." 100 years. Elara filed that revelation away to examine later. "And now I've found her." Kaelen's eyes met hers, burning with intensity. "The moment I saw you in that clearing, I knew. You're my mate, Elara. My other half. The one I've been searching for my entire life." The words should have been terrifying. They had known each other for mere hours. This was madness, impossible, too fast. But Elara felt the truth of it resonating in her bones. In the way her heart raced when he looked at her. In the certainty that had kept her from running when she should have fled. "I feel it too," she admitted. "I don't understand it, but I feel it. This pull toward you. The bond." Kaelen's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "It can be completed with a claiming bite, a ritual that would bind us permanently. But that's your choice, Elara. Always your choice. The bond will exist whether we complete it or not. But I would never force. I spent 15 years with no choices." Elara stepped closer to him. "My parents decided everything. What I ate, what I wore, how I spent every moment of every day. I won't let anyone make my decisions for me ever again. Not even you." "Good." The word was fierce and approving. "You shouldn't." You're not a servant anymore, Elara. You're... He seemed to struggle with the words. You're everything. They stood in the moonlit clearing, the world narrowed to just the two of them, and Elara made another choice. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. Kaelen went very still, as if afraid to move and break the spell. Then his arms came around her, careful and reverent, and he kissed her back with a tenderness that made tears prick at her eyes. When they finally broke apart, Kaelen rested his forehead against hers. We should reach the border before dawn. My people will meet us there. Will they accept me? Elara tried to keep the uncertainty from her voice. A human? They will accept you because you're mine. Kaelen's voice left no room for argument. And they will honor you because you're their queen. Queen. The word echoed in Elara's mind as they continued their journey through the forest. Her, a queen. The girl who had scrubbed floors and washed dishes and been treated as less than nothing. It seemed impossible. But then, so did everything that had happened in the past hours. They walked until the sky began to lighten in the east, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. The forest had changed around them, the trees growing larger and older, the underbrush thicker. Elara could feel a difference in the air itself, as if they had crossed some invisible boundary into a place where different rules applied. We're here, Kaelen said, leading her to the top of a small rise. Welcome to Wolf Haven. The valley spread out before them, and Elara's breath caught in her throat. It was beautiful. A river wound through the center like a silver ribbon, with clusters of buildings on either side. Not the rough huts she had imagined, but proper structures of stone and timber, with smoke rising from chimneys and gardens planted with early spring vegetables. Beyond the settlement, she could see meadows dotted with livestock and forests that climbed the mountainsides. But it was the people that made her stare. Even from a distance, she could see them moving through the settlement, and every single one of them was tall and powerfully built. Lycans. An entire community of them living openly in a way that would be impossible in human lands. It's amazing, Elara breathed. You built all this? We built it together. Kaelen's hand found hers again. I led, but every person down there contributed. That's how a pack works. A howl rose from the settlement, long and musical. Kaelen answered it with a howl of his own, the sound making Elara's skin prickle. Within moments, figures were running up the path toward them, moving within human speed. Elara tensed, but Kaelen's hand on hers was steady and reassuring. The first to reach them was a woman who looked to be in her 30s, with silver-white hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. She stopped a respectful distance away, her gaze moving from Kaelen to Elara and back again. Alpha. She inclined her head. We felt your return through the pack bonds. We were concerned when you didn't arrive last night. I was delayed. Kaelen drew Elara forward gently. I want you to meet someone. This is Elara. My mate. The woman's eyes widened, and then a brilliant smile spread across her face. Your mate? After all these years? She turned to Elara, and there was nothing but warmth in her expression. I'm Senna, the pack's second. It's an honor to meet you. The honor is mine, Elara managed, overwhelmed by the genuine welcome in the woman's eyes. I'm nobody. Really. Just. You're our queen, Senna interrupted firmly. The Alpha's mate is second only to the Alpha himself in our hierarchy. You're not nobody. You're everything. More Lycans were arriving now, gathering around them with expressions of curiosity and excitement. Elara heard whispers of mate and finally and she's so small. Kaelen's arm came around her waist, protective and possessive. Elara has had a difficult journey, he said, his voice carrying authority that made everyone fall silent. She needs rest and care. Senna, prepare the Alpha's residence. I want comfortable quarters, a hot bath, and food. The best of everything. Of course, Alpha. Senna bowed slightly. I'll see to it personally. Wait. Elara found her voice, even though her cheeks burned at being the center of so much attention. I don't need the best of everything. I'm used to simple. You deserve the best of everything. Kaelen cut her off gently but firmly. And you're going to start getting used to that right now. He looked at his gathered pack. Elara is to be treated with the utmost respect and care. Anyone who shows her anything less will answer to me personally. Is that understood? A chorus of agreement rose from the assembled Lycans. Elara felt simultaneously embarrassed and touched. These people didn't know her, had no reason to accept her, and yet they were looking at her with something like reverence simply because Kaelen had claimed her as his. Senna led them down the path into the settlement, chattering cheerfully about all the preparations they would need to make. A mating ceremony, of course, though that can wait until you're ready. And we'll need to prepare proper quarters. The Alpha's residence is nice, but it's been a bachelor's for too long. We'll need fabrics and furniture. And oh, we should throw a feast to welcome our queen properly. Senna, Kaelen said with patient amusement. One thing at a time. Right now, Elara needs rest. They reached a building near the center of the settlement, larger than the others and built of beautiful honey-colored stone. Kaelen led Elara inside, and she found herself in a spacious main room with a high ceiling and large windows that let in the morning light. The furniture was simple but well-made, comfortable rather than ostentatious. "This is your home?" she asked. "Our home," Kaelen corrected. "If you'll have it." Elara turned to look at him. This powerful alpha who commanded a pack of 200 Lycans, but looked at her like she was something precious and fragile. "I left my parents' house yesterday with nothing. Now I have a home, a people who call me queen, and a mate who looks at me like I'm worth something." Her voice cracked slightly. "It doesn't feel real." "It's real." Kaelen crossed to her, cupping her face in his large hands. "You are worth everything, Elara. And I'm going to spend every day proving that to you." Senna appeared in the doorway. "The bath is ready, my queen. And I've laid out some clothes that should fit you, though we'll have proper garments made soon." Queen. Elara was going to have to get used to that. She let Senna lead her to a bathing room where steam rose from a large copper tub filled with hot water. Fresh clothes lay folded on a chair, not servant's garb, but a soft dress in deep blue that looked like it would actually fit her properly. "I'll leave you to bathe," Senna said kindly. "Take your time. You're safe here." When the door closed, Elara slowly removed her worn, dirty clothing and sank into the hot water with a sigh of pure relief. She couldn't remember the last time she had bathed in water this hot, or had time to simply soak. At her parents' house, she had washed quickly in cold water, always aware that there was work to be done. She washed her hair with soap that smelled of lavender and honey, scrubbed the dirt from her skin, and let herself simply exist for the first time in longer than she could remember. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a thick towel, she found the blue dress fit perfectly. It was simple but well-made, with embroidery at the collar that must have taken hours of patient work. When she returned to the main room, she found Kaelen standing at the window, looking out over his territory. He turned when he heard her, and the expression on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. "You look..." He seemed to struggle for words. "Perfect. You look perfect." Elara smoothed the dress self-consciously. "It's just a dress." "It's not the dress." Kaelen crossed to her. "It's you. The way you're standing taller. The way the fear is gone from your eyes. That's what's perfect." He was right. Elara realized she did feel different. The constant anxiety that had lived in her chest for 15 years had eased here. She wasn't waiting for criticism or punishment. She wasn't watching every word, anticipating every need. "Come," Kaelen said, offering his arm. "Let me show you your kingdom." They walked through Wolf Haven together, and everywhere they went, Lycans stopped what they were doing to bow or wave or offer congratulations. Children ran up to shyly present Elara with wildflowers. Elderly Lycans who had lived for centuries smiled at her with genuine warmth. A group of women invited her to join their weaving circle whenever she wished. And through it all, Kaelen stayed beside her, introducing her with obvious pride, making sure she was comfortable, treating her not like a servant or a burden, but like the queen they all claimed she was. By midday, Elara's head was spinning with names and faces, but her heart felt fuller than it had in years. They stopped at a small garden where a fountain bubbled cheerfully. "How are you holding up?" Kaelen asked. "Overwhelmed," Elara admitted. "But in a good way. I've never been welcomed like this. Never been treated like I mattered. You matter to all of them because you matter to me." Kaelen pulled her close. "And you matter to me more than anything in this world." Elara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Yesterday, she had been nobody. A servant without value or purpose. Today, she was a queen, treasured and protected, standing in the arms of a man who looked at her like she hung the moon. "Thank you," she whispered. "For finding me. For seeing me." "Thank you," Kaelen countered. "For choosing to stay." The days that followed Elara's arrival in Wolf Haven passed in a blur of new experiences and small revelations. She learned that Lycans lived much longer than humans. Kaelen himself was 97 years old, though he appeared to be in his mid-30s. She discovered that the pack operated on a system of mutual support, with everyone contributing according to their abilities and receiving according to their needs. And she began to understand what it meant to be valued, not for what she could do, but simply for who she was. On the third morning, Elara woke to find Kaelen already gone from the large bed they had been sharing, though he had been unfailingly respectful, keeping to his side and never pushing for more than she was ready to give. She found him in the main room, speaking quietly with Senna. Both of them looked troubled. "What's wrong?" Elara asked, her stomach tightening with old anxiety. Kaelen turned immediately, his expression softening when he saw her. "Nothing you need to worry about, Elara." Elara crossed her arms. "I'm not a child to be protected from bad news." "What's happened?" He exchanged a glance with Senna, who nodded and quietly excused herself. When they were alone, Kaelen sighed. "Scouts reported a group of humans at our southern border. They're asking to speak with me about a missing girl." Elara's blood ran cold. "My parents." "Most likely." Kaelen's jaw tightened. "You don't have to see them. I can send them away. Tell them we know nothing." "No." Elara surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. "I want to see them. I want them to see me." Understanding dawned in Kaelen's eyes. "You want them to see what you've become. I want them to see that I'm not their servant anymore. That I'm worth more than they ever believed." Elara lifted her chin. "Can you arrange it?" "Of course." Kaelen pulled her into his arms. "But I'll be right beside you. And if they show you even a hint of disrespect, I'm ending the meeting immediately." 2 hours later, Elara stood in the settlement's main hall, wearing a dress of deep green that Senna had somehow procured overnight. Her hair was braided in an elaborate crown around her head, and she wore a necklace of silver and moonstone that Kaelen had presented to her that morning. "A gift from my queen," he had said, fastening it around her neck with reverent fingers. Now she stood beside Kaelen's chair, a throne, really, carved from dark wood and positioned on a raised dais, and watched as her parents were escorted into the hall. Lord Thorn and Lady Vane looked smaller than Elara remembered. Her father's face was red with exertion from the journey, her mother's fine dress was dusty from travel. They both stopped short when they saw Elara standing beside the massive Lycan king, dressed like nobility, looking down at them from the dais. "Elara." Her mother's voice was sharp with shock. "What is the meaning of this? We've been searching for you for days, worried sick, and we find you here playing dress-up with these creatures?" Kaelen growled low in his throat, but Elara placed a hand on his arm. "I'll handle this." She descended the steps slowly, deliberately, letting them see the confidence in her movements. "Hello, Mother." "Father. I wasn't aware you would notice I was gone, given how easily I was replaced by the servants you hired." "Don't be ridiculous," Lord Thorn blustered. "You're our daughter. Of course we noticed." Did you? Elara's voice was cold. Or did you notice that no one was there to cook your meals and wash your clothes? Lady Vane's face flushed. How dare you speak to us this way? After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done to me, you mean? Elara held her ground. You turned me into a servant in my own home. You worked me to exhaustion for 15 years without pay, without thanks, without even basic kindness. And when I finally found the courage to leave, you called me ungrateful. You are ungrateful. Lady Vane's voice rose. We gave you food and shelter. I earned that and more. Elara's hands were shaking, but her voice remained steady. I gave you 15 years of my life. Years I'll never get back. You're being dramatic, Lord Thorne said dismissively. We came to bring you home, Elara. Lord Ashford is still willing to take you on, but we had to beg him after you embarrassed us by running away. I'm not going anywhere. Elara cut him off. Wolf Haven is my home now. Wolf Haven? Lady Vane looked around the hall with obvious disdain. This village of beasts? You would choose this over your own family? These beasts have shown me more kindness in 3 days than you showed me in 15 years. Elara gestured to Kaelen. This is King Kaelen, Alpha of the Wolf Haven pack. And my mate. The silence that followed was absolute. Her parents stared at her, then at Kaelen, then back at her. Your mate? Lord Thorne finally managed. Elara, you can't be serious. These creatures aren't even human. No. They're better than human. Elara climbed back up the steps to stand beside Kaelen. They value strength and loyalty. They honor their leaders but don't accept cruelty. They care for their weak and celebrate their strong. And they've welcomed me not as a servant, but as their queen. Queen? Lady Vane's laugh was shrill. You're nobody, Elara. A useless girl who couldn't even attract a proper husband. That's enough. Kaelen's voice cracked like a whip, and Lady Vane's words died in her throat. He stood, his considerable height making him tower over everyone in the room. You will not speak to your daughter that way. Not in my hall. Not in my territory. Not anywhere I can hear you. Lord Thorne tried to gather his courage. Now see here, we're her parents. You were her jailers. Kaelen descended the steps, and both of Elara's parents instinctively backed away from his presence. You took a child and broke her spirit. Tried to convince her she was worthless so she would accept the prison you created. We did no such thing. Lady Vane protested. We raised her, fed her, clothed her. You used her. Kaelen's voice was deadly quiet now. And now you have the audacity to come to my territory and demand her return as if she were property you had misplaced. He moved to stand beside Elara, his hand finding hers. But Elara is not property. She is not a servant. She is my mate, my queen, and the most valuable person in this entire settlement. Elara felt tears prick at her eyes. No one had ever defended her like this. No one had ever looked at her parents and told them the truth of what they had done. You've been given a choice, Kaelen continued. You can leave now, return to your home, and never contact Elara again. Or you can stay and witness our mating ceremony tomorrow, see for yourselves what she's become, and then leave and never contact her again. Those are your only options. This is absurd, Lord Thorne sputtered. You can't keep her here against her will. I'm not staying against my will. Elara stepped forward. I'm staying because for the first time in my life, I'm valued. I'm honored. I'm loved. She looked at her parents, and for the first time, she felt nothing but pity for them. I'm happy here. Happier than I ever was with you. Lady Vane's face worked through several emotions before settling on cold fury. Then you're no daughter of mine. I haven't been your daughter for a long time, Mother. I've been your servant. Your unpaid labor. A convenient solution to not wanting to pay for actual help. But I'm not that anymore. Fine. Lord Thorn grabbed Lady Vane's arm. Keep her then. See how long you can tolerate her uselessness. They turned to leave, but Elara's voice stopped them. I'm not useless. They paused at the doorway. I learned that here, Elara continued. I learned that my worth isn't measured by how clean the floors are or how quickly I can prepare a meal. I learned that I'm brave and strong and capable of choosing my own future. I learned that I deserve to be treated with kindness. She squeezed Kaelen's hand. I learned what it feels like to be loved. Her parents left without another word. And Elara felt a weight lift from her chest that she had been carrying for 15 years. Kaelen pulled her into his arms, and she let herself cry against his chest. Not tears of sadness, but of release. You were magnificent, he murmured against her hair. Fierce and strong and absolutely magnificent. I was terrified, Elara admitted. But I meant every word. She pulled back to look up at him. Did you mean what you said? About a mating ceremony tomorrow? Kaelen's expression turned uncertain, vulnerable in a way she had never seen. Only if you want it. The mate bond exists whether we complete it or not. But the claiming bite and ceremony would make it official to the pack. Binding in a way that... Elara kissed him, cutting off his careful explanation. When she pulled back, his eyes were burning with that inner fire she had come to recognize as his wolf rising close to the surface. I want it, she said firmly. I want to be bound to you. To this place. To this life. I want to be your mate and your queen. Officially. Elara. Her name was a prayer on his lips. Are you certain? Once we complete the bond, it's permanent. You'll live as long as I do, centuries, potentially. You'll be tied to me and to the pack in ways that... I'm certain. Elara cupped his face in her hands. For the first time in my life, I'm completely certain about something. I choose you, Kaelen. I choose this. The ceremony took place the following evening in a meadow just outside the settlement, under the light of a full moon. The entire pack gathered to witness, forming a circle around Elara and Kaelen. Senna had dressed Elara in a gown of white and silver that seemed to capture moonlight in its folds. Flowers were woven into her hair, and the moonstone necklace gleamed at her throat. But it was the look in Kaelen's eyes when he saw her that made her feel truly beautiful. You take my breath away, he said, taking her hands as they stood in the center of the circle. Senna stepped forward to officiate, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet evening air. We gather tonight to witness the completion of a mate bond. The joining of two souls that the moon has chosen for each other. She looked at Elara and Kaelen with obvious affection. Do you, Elara, accept Kaelen as your mate? Do you accept the bond that will tie your life to his, to the pack's? I do, Elara said clearly. With all my heart. And do you, Kaelen, accept Elara as your mate? Do you swear to honor her, protect her, and cherish her for all the days of your life? I do, Kaelen's voice was rough with emotion. For all the days of my life and beyond. Senna smiled. Then complete the bond. Kaelen drew Elara close, tilting her head gently to expose the curve of her neck. This will hurt for a moment, he whispered. But only a moment. And then you'll feel everything I feel. Every emotion. Every thought when I think of you. I'm ready. Elara's heart raced, but not with fear. With anticipation. His lips brushed her skin, gentle at first, and then his teeth pierced the tender flesh where her neck met her shoulder. The pain was sharp and bright, but it transformed almost instantly into something else, something overwhelming and beautiful. The bond exploded between them. No longer a gentle pull, but a living connection that bound their souls together. Elara felt Kaelen's love crash over her like a wave. Fierce and protective and absolutely unwavering. She felt his relief at finally finding her after nearly a century of searching. She felt his determination to spend every day proving she was valued and treasured and loved. And through it all, she felt her own emotions reflected back to her, amplified and understood completely. When Kaelen pulled back, his eyes were glowing with an inner light. The bite mark on her neck was already healing, leaving a silvered scar that would mark her forever as his. "My mate," he said reverently. "My queen. My king," Elara whispered back. "My home." The pack erupted in howls of celebration, the sound echoing off the mountains and filling the valley with joy. Kaelen swept Elara into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. Later, after the feast and the dancing and the endless stream of congratulations, Kaelen carried Elara back to their home. He sat her down gently in their room, the moonlight streaming through the windows, casting everything in silver. "How do you feel?" he asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Elara considered the question. She felt the bond humming between them, warm and constant. She felt the acceptance of 200 pack members, all of whom now considered her family. She felt the weight of her past lifting, replaced by the promise of a future she had chosen for herself. "I feel free," she said finally. "Truly free." Kaelen pulled her close, and Elara rested her head over his heart, listening to its steady beat. Through the bond, she could feel his contentment, his love, his absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. 3 months later, Elara stood in the settlement's main square, directing the construction of a new building. It had been her idea, a community center where pack members could gather for meals, celebrations, and simply to enjoy each other's company. A bit more to the left, she called to the workers, who adjusted the beam with good-natured efficiency. She had discovered she had a talent for organization and planning, skills that had been honed during her years managing her parents' household, but were finally being used for something meaningful. Senna approached with a smile. "The Queen's project is coming along nicely." "Please don't call it that," Elara said, though she was smiling. "It's for everyone. Which is exactly why we call it the Queen's project." Senna handed her a cup of tea. "You've brought something to this pack that we were missing. Not just because you're Kaelen's mate, but because you understand what it means to build community. To make people feel valued." Elara felt warmth bloom in her chest. "I'm just doing what makes sense." "You're doing more than that." Senna gestured to the bustling square where pack members worked together, laughing and talking. "Look at them. Look at what you've inspired." Elara did look, and she saw it. The joy in their faces. The sense of purpose in their movements. She had done that. Not as a servant following orders, but as a leader who saw what was needed and made it happen. Kaelen found her there an hour later, his arms coming around her from behind. Through the bond, she felt his pride and his love, constant as the sun. "Hard at work, my queen?" "Always." Elara leaned back against his chest. "Someone has to keep this pack organized. And you do it brilliantly." He pressed a kiss to the claiming mark on her neck, and Elara felt the bond flare with warmth. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "Only twice." "Unacceptable. I'll have to remedy that." They stood together, watching their pack work and laugh and live. And Elara thought about the girl she had been just 3 months ago. That girl who had scrubbed floors and believed herself worthless. That girl who had run into the forest with nothing but a desperate hope for something better. She had found so much more than she ever imagined. She had found a home. A family. A purpose. She had found her own strength, not granted by anyone else, but discovered deep within herself. She had found a partner who valued her voice and her choices and her presence. And she had found herself. The real Elara. Not the broken servant, but the strong, capable woman who had always been there, buried beneath years of cruel words and crushing expectations. "What are you thinking?" Kaelen asked, feeling her emotions shift through the bond. "I'm thinking about how different my life is now." Elara turned in his arms to face him. "I'm thinking about how far I've come." "You were always this person," Kaelen said softly. "Strong and brave and worthy of honor. I just gave you the space to remember it." We gave it to each other, Elara corrected. She stood on her toes to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. Around them, the pack continued their work, their queen and king at the center of it all. That night, Elara stood at the window of their home, looking out over Wolf Haven. Lights glowed in windows throughout the settlement. Smoke rose from chimneys, and she could hear the distant sound of laughter from the tavern. This was her kingdom. Not because she had been born to it, but because she had chosen it. Because she had been brave enough to walk away from everything familiar and walk toward the unknown. And what she had found in that unknown was everything she had never dared to dream of. Kaelen came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. Elara thought about her parents, probably sleeping in their fine house with servants they now had to pay. She thought about the girl she had been, small and afraid and convinced she deserved nothing better. She thought about the woman she had become. Strong and valued and loved beyond measure. "Not a single one," she said, squeezing his hand. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." And as the moon rose over the mountains, casting silver light across the valley, Elara felt the bonds sing with contentment. She had been a servant, treated as worthless by the very people who should have cherished her most. But she had become a queen. Not through birthright or conquest, but through the simple act of choosing herself. Choosing freedom. Choosing love. Choosing a future where she would never again be invisible or undervalued or afraid. She had chosen to be seen. And what she had found in being seen was everything she had always deserved. Everything she had finally claimed for herself. Her happily ever after. What do you think of Elara's journey? Do you believe Kaelen was right to confront her parents, or should he have let Elara handle it alone? Let me know in the comments below. If you love this story of redemption and true love, please hit that like button, it really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another passionate love story. Until next time.